Ned, welcome to the first podcast.
Thanks, good to be here.
So I always kind of start for people that may not know who you are, maybe just give them a mini primer on who Ned is and who Great Question is.
Sure. So my name's Ned. I'm co-founder and CEO of Great Question. Great Question is an all-in-one customer research platform built for the enterprise. We basically make it easy to recruit people, whether it's your own customers, non-customers, and run any kind of research against them, like interviews or surveys or prototype tests, and then share with your team everything you're learning all in one place. And so I am originally from Melbourne, but been living out in the Bay Area now since 2013.
Awesome. So I have my limits, obviously, when I'm doing my snooping and research. And obviously on your LinkedIn, I knew you had originated from Melbourne, but the first role that I think you have on LinkedIn was Native Digital. Yeah. What was happening with Ned Dwyer before that?
A lot of things. So I counted up one day, and I've had something like 26 different jobs since I was a young buck. I think my first job was when I was 12, delivering newspapers of some sort. I worked as a butcher. I sold motorcycles, all kinds of things. But always been pretty entrepreneurial, trying to build my own business of some sort. I installed photo booths in nightclubs and ran my own club nights, and Native was kind of an extension of that. I actually didn't start Native. I came into Native. It was an existing business run by a guy called Nick Crocker and Ben Johnston out of Brisbane. And the reason why I got into it was they had this amazing group of customers that were commissioning them to build all kinds of digital products and online ad campaigns. And it was a vehicle for me to go and test out my own product ideas. And so I was there for 5 years on my path to going and finding what was the next big digital startup idea I was going to begin. Which was born out of there, called Twiki.
Would you say that you're a product guy? I mean, we've had these conversations like with multiple founders, right? And these kind of like early identification of passion areas within founders. Like I think about Matt from Schedulo. Like he was passionate in his early career about product. What about yourself? Was there any like inclinations of, customer research, or was it product, or was it sales, etc.?
So I studied marketing at school, and so marketing was clearly something I cared about. And I mean, in year 2, when in grade 2, my teachers were like, "You're either going to be a lawyer or a pastor." And so I think like that sales side of things, and then like talking to people, business development kind of thing was very strong. I think I got into product more out of less because I thought I was be particularly good at it, but more like someone needs to will these things into existence, and like the product surface area is what everyone's going to experience, less than I was particularly great at product development.
I was rereading some of your blog posts before this, and what was interesting is I reread one from, I think it was originally on your WordPress blog many, many years ago, about how many ideas you worked on even before Elto, which was the sort of first larger business you went and built. When did you sort of start to recognize that entrepreneurial passion? Was it in your teens, or was it actually post-university, Native Digital, or that sort of era? When did you start to think, I'm going to go really start building and testing ideas at a scale?
I think it was when I turned 25. I was able to look back at that point and see, there is a common connection between all these really disparate things I've been working on, and that's been general entrepreneurialism. It's like starting something from scratch. Yep. And at that point, I also discovered that there was a course at RMIT, which was in entrepreneurship. I was like, I can study this thing, and this is potentially like a real career I could go and do. Like, what does it mean? And then from there, I was able to build my plans out to go and become a founder and decide that being an entrepreneur is my career. And so that I knew as a result of that, all right, I'm going to start a lot of things. It's going to be a long journey. Some of the things are going to work. Some things aren't going to work. And I think one of the greatest pieces of advice I got was from my lecturers, who was like, you just want your first thing to be successful so that you can keep going. You're not a complete idiot. You can keep, maybe start something else. And then you want your last thing to be successful so that you can retire. And so the question is the thing you're working on now, hopefully it's your last thing.
And so what era is this? Like when you started to really think, well, I might have a go at this entrepreneurial thing and try and find something that's going to scale. This is Australia, what era?
So this would have been Australia. I would have been 25-ish. So say that was 2008, something like that. Yeah.
Like was kind of a dead period for startup creation in Australia, right? There'd been this sort of first gen of VC that had blown up. We didn't yet have the Blackbirds and the Airtrees yet. How did you go about figuring it out? You know, there wasn't the same level of resource clearly that there is today.
I think it's like kind of birds of a feather flock together. We just sort of started looking out for people with like-minded interests. I think Hacker News, like Y Combinator's Hacker News, news.ycombinator.com was like a big source, and we started a meetup, and I met a bunch of other YC founders through that, and then we started our own meetup called The Hive, which ran all around Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and that was another conduit to kind of bring people together, had similar ideas, and just kind of commiserate and talk about ideas, and lots of interesting companies came out of that. Adioso came out of that. There's a whole bunch of others, and so I think it was just trying to find community of that, and it changed a lot during that time. There was no real angel investment scene, or there was, but they weren't doing any investments, and there weren't any early stage startup funds or anything like that. It was hard work.
So Elto? So that was 2010, 2011 that you started to sort of formally work on that, and that was the first startup you did with PJ? That
was the first startup I did with PJ, who's still my co-founder today. So I was looking around for startup ideas. I'd been running the agency for quite a while now. We'd done some really interesting work, but I knew that it was all really short-lived. You'd spend a long time working on something, it would launch, and then it would die because you weren't in control of it. It was like owned by some client. And so I went to a startup weekend and met a bunch of people, and one of them was my co-founder, and worked on this startup idea, which was called Tweaky at the time, renamed to Elto. And the idea was, how can we help people, or the problem was, it sucks to edit an existing website. You've already got some website built, you want to go and make the logo bigger or add shopping cart functionality to it. It's really difficult. And there was no one out there solving that problem. Everyone wanted to build a brand new website from scratch. And so we created a platform and a marketplace to connect you to people to adjust your existing website. We launched it at Startup Weekend. It did really well. And we then raised a little bit of funding, angel funding, and launched it, and eventually sold that to GoDaddy in 2015.
What was the actual timing of you actually coming to the US, though? Was that during Elto, or was that post the acquisition?
That was about a year and a half into Elto, something like that. And even when I started it, I knew that, cool, the goal is to come and bring this company to the States, because I knew that our customers were there, our partners there, like WordPress.com, Shopify. And if we were going to raise more money, it would be in the States. And ultimately, we knew that we'd sell this business at some point. Likely it was going to be to someone in the US. So let's just get on a plane and get out there. I always say, like, if I was in comedy, I would have moved to New York. Like, if I was in finance, New York, fashion, maybe Milan. But none of those places really in Australia at the time. So let's get to the States where all the big boys are playing.
Did you always have that ambition that you wanted to go live offshore in whatever your craft ended up being?
I think so. Like, if I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do, let's go and do it with the best of the best. And so, that was definitely a motivator.
What were some of the lessons coming from Elto? Like, I mean, from an outsider looking in, it looks fabulous, right? Like an exit to a reputable company. But obviously things aren't always that clear. What was the actual process like with GoDaddy? And I guess some of the kind of lessons learned from that.
Yeah. So, I mean, at Elto, we did okay. Like, I consider it a single in baseball parlance. We didn't knock it out of the park. We did okay. And then, joining GoDaddy was kind of a bit of a cherry on top, bit of a consolation prize, I guess, than what we would have liked to take the business to, the new heights we could have taken it to. And so it was a bittersweet experience joining GoDaddy. So I can talk a bit more about that than the process. Because I joined and we're like, great, we've got this product. Now we get to go and access GoDaddy's 13 million small business customers and their 1 million web designers and developers we can plug into our platform and make some magic. But actually, being someone that's never really worked at a large organization, it was tough. I had to figure out how to navigate corporate politics and people that were leveling. Like, your title actually made a big difference on whether someone would listen to you or show up to your meeting or reply to your email. And it was really hard. But I learned a lot through that process. And I think the biggest one was the power of UX research, which has then obviously gone and influenced the company I'm building now. But also when to swing an axe and when to sort of go a little more softly in your interactions with folks in that corporate environment. But very glad we did it, and then kept the band together now to go and start Great Question, all those years later.
I think I met you just as you were transitioning out of GoDaddy and sort of starting to think about what came next, and sort of have had the privilege of kind of a few different iterations and ideas that I guess you've worked on. Is it fair that when you finished up at GoDaddy, you were clear that I am going to go again, I'm going to go find something, I'm going to build something bigger and even more enduring than what I'd done with Elto? Is that was pretty clear, I think, even when I met you back in 2017.
Definitely. I mean, when we joined GoDaddy, day one, we're like, all right, what's our next startup idea going to be? And it was this career mindset that entrepreneurship is a career. I'm going to go start many companies during my life. And so, all right, that one's done. What's the next one? What learnings can I get here? And I need to go and fulfill what I was going to do at GoDaddy. But definitely starting to think about the next one. And so every week, my co-founder and I would meet up and do what we called cool ideas, where we just bounce ideas of things that we were thinking about or that we'd seen in the market that could be interesting businesses, and then riff on them and iterate on them over the time. And so when I left, we both quit at the same time, basically the same day. We moved to Mexico, and we're like, we think we can go and start a company in a month. We're going to live on ramen and just like do nothing but talk about ideas, talk to customers, and run. And that's what we did. Turns out it's a lot harder than that. And so a month later, we didn't come up with any ideas, and we decided that actually it's probably easier to go and pursue them independently, which we did. And so I kind of spent the next few years in the wilderness trying to find the next startup idea, because it's not easy. But I think during that time, I developed a lot of frameworks for what a good idea might look like and what the good idea might look like to myself as well. And so things like looking back at my past experiences and successes and the things that got my brain lit up, or looking for common stories of startup problem opportunities being created, like when a public company acquires a company, they generally don't do so well. Or a private equity company acquires a company, they generally don't do so well. So those could create opportunities. And there's another 50 more of those similar. So that was the process.
Yeah, interesting. Because I remember, we sort of engaged again when you were thinking seriously about building a company called Spritz. And what I find so interesting about Spritz, and we talked on it for a little bit before we jumped to Great Question, is it was kind of perfect timing for you guys in terms of market. Like if we think about the Ramps and the Brexes and these that have gone and built out of what you guys were building with Spritz, and I'll get you to sort of briefly cover what it was you guys were going after. But I think ultimately it didn't yield for you guys. And I remember reading a very interesting blog you wrote when you decided to kind of pull up stumps there. But, talk us still about at a high level what you were building, but what was the learning there? Because I have some views, but it'd be interesting to get your take on that experience and why it didn't sort of reach the potential.
Sure. So Spritz was a corporate card startup. Effectively, you can think about something like Brex or Ramp that exists today. We give you a corporate card to everyone in your company, and that's how you're going to manage your expenses. And so you just put everything on your corporate card, and then there'll be rules applied to it which will allow you to not overspend in any category, or with vendors you shouldn't be spending money on, things like that. Great idea. And it was really born out of one of my frameworks that I developed, which was you should be looking for a new infrastructure which exists that has unlocked new capabilities previously unavailable. And so in that case, Stripe had come out with their issuing product. So now anyone could go and create a corporate card and brand it, and there was a great API you could connect to go and build these kind of products. And the timing on it was incredible because Brex hadn't launched yet. None of these other companies had launched yet. In fact, you knew it was so early because I was on a flight to a Xero accounting conference with a stack of business cards that I immediately had to throw in the bin because a press release had just gone out that Brex is here and they've just raised $50 million to build a corporate credit card startup. And the reason I had to throw the cards in the bin was that our name at the time was Rex. And so I was like, okay, these guys have beat me to the punch. Go back to the drawing board, and I'm going to have to need to do something different now. I think the lessons for me in that building that company there were definitely lessons around picking the right market. For me, I didn't have a lot of fintech experience, and I didn't really think that mattered, but it turned out it did because there were bigger players, better funded, that knew a lot more about card dynamics and banking and finance in general that I didn't, and it's kind of the things you don't know. And so that was a bit of a problem. The second was I actually didn't start that with PJ, my current co-founder. He worked on it with us, but actually it was another co-founder who I'd never met before in person. We got introduced through that process, and that founder gelling process is really hard to do remotely. And so that was a mistake. And so cool, let's go back to working with the guy. You've proven talent. Look, there's a whole host of other ideas, but it ended up working out not too badly for us. We sold the business eventually to an Australian payroll company, which more than paid for the time we invested into it. It was about a year and a half, and yet proof again. I think that was what gave me real confidence that the first business wasn't just a strike of lightning, that actually this is a reputable career that I can be on as a founder.
Before we jump into great question, I want to touch on a couple of different topics, just that I think kind of like in my research, you seem quite reflective in nature. And Ben's already mentioned the blog posts, which are exceptional. But I want to read out one thing here from your LinkedIn, and that was the kind of sabbatical part. And it says, took time out to reevaluate my life, goals, and future. Traveled, read books, trained for a marathon, got very bored, got back to work. Does that